Nowadays, Fallout is mostly seen as a game franchise where you find the ruins of a retro-futuristic America turned modern-day Detroit. Except the only rap you'll be listening to here is the Ink Spots. The only lean you'll be sipping on is Nuka-Cola and urinal water. And the only ops you'll be slotting on are Shrek and a bunch of hooligans dressed up in BDSM gear trying to pose as raiders, who get bullied by whatever the fuck this gun is supposed to be and your built-in aimbot.
This motherfucker don't miss.
Until of course your lore-friendly mods causes the game to crash and an hour of precious gameplay to be deleted. So overall, 1,000 times more happy and colorful than any post-apocalyptic game set in Eastern Europe. But you see, my friend, a long time ago, a time so long ago that your local Blockbuster wasn't a mattress hub. A time so long ago that I, and probably a good amount of people watching this, were merely an uncomfortable itch in our father's nutsacks. During this time, Fallout was same, but different. You didn't start the game off in your power fantasy, tearing Deathclaws in two with your minigun. You started off the game with a character who could barely hit a rat directly in front of him.
This motherfucker miss.
You didn't get your 50s music to rock out to, only this creepy ass ambient music to remind you what environment you're in. You didn't get your wacky guns made during woodcarving class, or your World War I machine gun labeled as an assault rifle. You got realistic looking weapons. For the most part, there is still definitely some goofy shit in there. You didn't get to explore the remains of super retro futuristic cities and buildings with tons of colors and curves and unique shapes. Instead, the cities are scattered across the masses of vast desert and are these husks of concrete with creepy ass faces and statues on them. The ghouls don't just look like Deadpool missing a nose, with their cute little beady black eyes. Yeah, wow. No wonder people don't let you guys into their settlements. Holy shit.
Normie.
But more important than all of this, you were able to shoot kids. Look, I'm far from the first person to talk about how dark and scary the first Fallout games are. Nor am I the first person to talk about how Todd Howard has no idea what Fallout is. You know, maybe Todd should have just stuck to the chess club. I'm kidding, Todd, I love you. In this video, I want to give a deep dive into the change of art style throughout the different Fallout games, and how the art style in the early games built an unforgiving and bleak atmosphere in a destroyed world, while the newer art style builds a more wacky, post-apocalyptic, and overly retro-futuristic world. Fallout 1 would start its humble beginnings at Interplay Studios, a company which has now been so utterly defeated from bankruptcy that their last new game was made in 2012. But they did leave off with a banger, Stonekeep, Bone of the Ancestors. Ignore that it's not rated on Google or Metacritic. I'm sure it's just because everyone's too busy playing it. In 1994, a programmer at Interplay by the name of Tim Kaine got a small team together by emailing the company if they wanted to show up for pizza. Because he wasn't actually allowed to ask people to join his team. At first, all Tim Kaine had was an engine, so the team had to think of a setting. Ideas like aliens and time travel were tossed around, but eventually, the team settled on post-apocalyptic, with inspirations from Mad Max and a boy and his dog. One of the most pivotal people for the development of Fallout's art style, into something that would stick, is art director Leonard Boyarsky. So after settling on a post-apocalyptic setting, the team were just going to make a Mad Max-style RPG game. It wasn't until one fateful drive from work, where Leonard had a vision. Perhaps the right neurons just shot at the right time, or perhaps some old 50s music was playing on the radio, or maybe a third party, from the future, took their opportunity to send a message and set the wheels of fate into motion to ensure his empire. Either way, when Leonard returned to work the next day, he suggested that they put a 1950s spin on the game, which made Fallout into the game that it was, and into the franchise that it is now. For better or for worse. The retro-futuristic movie, Forbidden Planet, which is technically just a futuristic movie because it was made in the 1950s, would be used as a reference to the art staff, to show them how to design any technology in Fallout. For example, things like the robots, or laser guns. It may surprise you though, that another influence for the art staff is a lesser known box office bomb, City of Lost Children. So much so that the art staff would have it on repeat in their office, taking inspiration from the steam-powered tech and dials in the film. You can see the Ockler on the T-51 power armor is based on these Ocklers in the film. The dark, grungy atmosphere in this film might have also been an early influence for Fallout cities. So early Fallout for sure had its 1950s style in many places, but what makes old Fallout's art style different from the newer art style is that this approach was more nuanced. A great way to explain it is that early Fallout didn't take place in a world that looks like how people in the 50s would imagine the future, but instead takes place in a world that has advanced to the future with some stylistic remnants of the 50s. I mean, hell, most of the armors made for Fallout 1 were made before the 50s style was even brought up, and I wouldn't be surprised if the same applied for some of the guns. Fallout 2 would release a year later after the original in 1998 and follow these footsteps, even with key figures like Tim Kaine, Leonard Boyarsky, and Jason Anderson leaving the project to form Troika Games. Now, Fallout 1 and 2 were dark.
You have died.
No, like literally. The most used colors are browns and grays, which makes sense seeing the world was literally nuked.
War never changes.
Like I mentioned earlier, the older Fallout buildings were often made of mostly concrete, adorned with these faces and statues, overall having an Art Deco style to them. This style could be seen in places like the Cathedral, Necropolis, the Hub, this random intro city, and the Enclave oil rig, where they even put the faces on the pipes. Art Deco is an interesting style choice for Fallout, because it was on its way out the door by the 1950s, and was mostly present in the 20s and 30s with buildings like the Chrysler and Empire State Building in New York City. Art Deco is described as a style that represents luxury, glamour, and the progress of technology, which really adds a layer of depressing irony when used on a society that got sent back to the Stone Age, with these buildings serving as a reminder of what once was. This architecture also gives off a good authoritarian vibe, with these statues and faces on these dark opposing structures, as if this powerful government was always watching, and if you know anything about the lore, you know it still is.
The President of the United fucking States of America.
Early Fallout had its fair share of goofy weapons that looked like they were pulled from the COD Zombies mystery box, but these wacky retro-futuristic weapons were mostly energy weapons, so it's to be expected. The weapons that shoot actual bullets tend to look more realistic, with most of them being based on real-life weapon designs. Some of these designs even being modern, which is crazy. Like imagine seeing a P90 in current Fallout. A few of these guns were also real-life experimental weapons, like the G11, that give off this sci-fi feel while still feeling grounded. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the iconic talking heads, which, similar to the models in Doom, were sculpted from clay, with what would be an 8-month process for each head. These models are definitely a bit uncanny, along with all the other 90s era graphics in this game.
Yeah, that brother's starving.
But these hand-sculpted models also add charm to the characters that were deemed special enough to have one. And with characters like Seth the Ghoul, the Super Mutants, Frank Corrigan, and the Master, the uncanny 90s graphics play into their favor, along with their amazing designs. Seth the Ghoul looks like somebody in the process of falling apart, with an eyeball and eyelids missing and skin peeling off. And the Super Mutants look like intimidating beasts, but still vaguely human, with straps needed to hold up their oversized lips. All these art style choices I mentioned about Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 come together perfectly, with elements like the music that sounds like the echoes of the dead, the death screens of your skeleton laid bare across the desert, the brutal death animations, and the overall dark themes like how a fat crime lord is better for a town than the literal sheriff, to create a bleak and unforgiving atmosphere of a once dominant society completely robbed of life by a nuclear apocalypse, with what's left of civilization having to survive this harsh environment and maybe even build something new from the ashes. The year is 2004, and Interplay is broke. The last two Fallout games, being Tactics and Brotherhood of Steel, weren't very popular, with Brotherhood of Steel especially being a stinker. And they couldn't just make Fallout 3, well, because
And there's no money in here!
So they auctioned out the rights for Bethesda to make 3 Fallout games, but they ended up selling the whole rights in 2006, and the game that would come out of Bethesda's development was Fallout 3. Now, as many of you likely know, Bethesda's vision of Fallout would be different. The franchise was 3D now and made for a bigger audience, therefore it had more hand-holding and less vaporizing children, even when it was desperately needed.
Don't take another step, or we'll blow your fucking head off.
The game was far less unforgiving, with real-time combat instead of turn-based combat, perks every level instead of every 3, quest markers instead of having to figure out where to go.
Where the fuck am I, bro? What the fuck, Apple Maps? Nah, bro, fuck Apple Maps, bro. What the fuck?
And a million of other ways that I couldn't even begin to get into. But even though Fallout 3 was catered towards a larger audience, the style of the original games were brought into the 3D world fairly accurately. Starting with the guns, overall most of the non-energy weapons would still be based on or heavily inspired by real-life weapons, like the classic games. The only difference this time is all these guns would be solely based off designs from the 60s and before to fit a stronger 50s aesthetic, with the only exceptions being the 10mm pistol, sorta, looking like a Desert Eagle, and the 10mm SMG, kinda, looking like this modern SMG prototype. So, no guns like the P90 in this game. Also, guns like the rocket launcher and the minigun were replaced for more fictional looking alternatives. In terms of architecture, Fallout 3 would remain mostly faithful to Fallout 1 and 2, with dark buildings and art deco, complete with faces and statues. But there would be more variety, like streamlined modern, a style of art deco, Googie, a style influenced by cars, jets, and the space age, and brutalism, which fits the capital of Fallout's government nicely. Oh, and can't forget there's actual houses here now too. Also, the vaults would be mostly faithful to the original games, just with more detail and the use of concrete for a lot of the interior, instead of just a bluish metal. And lastly, pretty much everything from the armors, to the creatures and robots, and down to the Nuka-Cola bottles were redesigned, which makes sense when you have a completely different team adapting an isometric franchise with sprites to 3D and having it take place on the other side of the country. The vault suits were no longer skin tight, but are now baggy, with a belt and washed out colors, as if they were passed down through multiple generations. The ghouls don't look quite as terrifying as before, and no longer call you a normie, but they still retain many aspects that made them scary, like the missing nose and having their skin rotting away to reveal exposed muscle and nerves. The Pip-Boy is mounted to your wrist now, no longer looking like it was pulled out the trash, and is also missing the cool 50s vacuum tubes. The laser gun and pistol now have this iconic, green, rectangular battery look to them, instead of just looking like normal guns with extra flair. And lastly, this one isn't super important, but the mole rats in the last game were just fat rats, but now they're naked mole rats, which aren't even native to America. This game's a 1 out of 10 now. Now there is one artist who can be credited behind all these redesigns and behind the overall art style of Fallout 3, and that person is Adamowicz. Adam would be the sole concept artist behind Fallout 3 and be responsible for bringing the original games into a 3D form, making something both unique but still very much understanding and capturing the gritty spirit of the older games in a way that will likely never be able to be replicated. Adam's amazing artwork, with this cold metallic vibe filled with pipes, tubes, wires, and ridges, is a huge part of what brought the dark and gray atmosphere of Fallout 3 to life, an atmosphere that people will cite as one of this game's best aspects. Fallout 3 would further push the 50s style of the original games in ways I've already mentioned, like using mostly firearms from the 50s time period, as well as using more architectural styles that were popular around the 50s. But these guns and buildings are still fairly realistic and grounded, instead of being completely fictional designs. Another reason for the franchise seemingly being more 50s and retro-futuristic is because it was now 3D, instead of being from a top-down point of view. Meaning many props, like the retro-futuristic cars, classic glass soda bottles, old-school antenna TVs, and 50s billboards that would normally be missed are now constantly visible and shaping your perception of the world. So, overall, when it comes to art style, Fallout 3 would succeed at updating and improving the looks of the original games, while also taking creative liberties and making something new but still familiar. Now I know some of you may be asking, what about Fallout New Vegas? Look, New Vegas is my favorite Fallout game too, but it was made in 18 months. Obsidian pretty much had a speedrun game development, so there wasn't much room for changing what was already established in Fallout 3. Only thing notable I can bring up is there's a lot of modern guns again, like the classic games, even having a modern M4 looking assault rifle. Anyways, on to the main topic. Bethesda would start early production on Fallout 4 just a year after Fallout 3, in 2009, but unfortunately, a year before full production would start, Adamowicz would pass away due to complications of lung cancer on February 9th, 2012. Adam's passing would inevitably shift the art style of Fallout 4, and oh boy, did it change a lot. The dark, gritty color palette of the old games are gone, instead being replaced by nice blue sky with bright cars and buildings. Speaking of the buildings, the main Boston area is covered in these ridiculous colorful metal skyscrapers that don't resemble anything in our real world. The realistic wooden houses of Fallout 3 are now replaced by these steel homes, exaggerations of an actual real type of prefabricated house that was only in production for 3 years. The cars take inspiration from already ridiculous 50s prototypes and pushes them further to be somehow even more retro future, with even more curves. This is what cars all the way back in Fallout 1 and 2 looked like for a reference. When it comes to guns, there's a far lower amount of actual real guns in this game in comparison to other Fallout games. The 10mm pistol was made to be huge, not even resembling any actual real guns anymore. The assault rifle was changed to be based off a World War I machine gun, with the second closest thing to an assault rifle being based on a World War II Soviet submachine gun. And when it comes to modern weapons, the most modern real-life gun in this game is a bolt-action rifle made in 1962. Pretty much everything was redesigned yet again, from the props to the creatures. The Nuka-Cola bottles now have this ridiculous rocket shape to them. The vertibirds are now fat and more sleek and curved. The ghouls have lost all of what originally made them creepy, instead looking like old burn victims with puppy eyes. And the supermutants just look like big buff green men instead of actual mutated beasts, and are missing their massive shoulders. So overall, pretty much everything was made to look absurdly retro-futuristic. The nuance that existed in the previous games is completely gone, with everything looking fictional. The retro-futurism is now all-encompassing, making this once dark and bleak franchise that properly displayed the horrors of a nuclear apocalypse into a bright and cartoony, post-nuclear playground. Now, why did Bethesda choose to go towards this direction with the art style? Maybe Bethesda's art team didn't want to disrespect Adam by copying and making a worse version of his art style, instead choosing to try something different while still keeping some of his great designs. This is a fair reason, but Adam's artwork for Fallout 3 was already his own interpretation of the original 2D games. So, nothing was really stopping the new art team from going back to the starting point and making their very own interpretations of the OG games. Hell, that's actually what they did for things like the vault suits, taking inspiration from the classic game's vault suits and making the new ones brighter and tighter like they used to be. In my opinion, the real reason Bethesda changed the art style was in order to make Fallout both stick out more and look more unique. Before, you could look at the Fallout games and call them Mad Max simulators and, I don't know, gray building simulators, and while obviously there's way more to it than that if you actually play the games, you can't really blame someone for getting that immediate first impression. With this art style though, Fallout sticks out way more, with brighter colors and wackier retro future designs, setting it apart even further from other post-apocalyptic works. And this change has been partnered with the unfortunate side effect of the overall tone of the current games being far more lighthearted, rather than being the bleak and more realistic nuclear wastelands of before. So, maybe war never changes, but Fallout's art style sure did. So yeah, oh, yeah, I almost forgot. Look, you probably thought I was some big Fallout expert, but this was actually all a ruse. A game rigged from the start. See, I've never actually played more than a couple hours of the most important entry, being Fallout 76. But alas, I've seen enough gameplay from Ninja, Logic, and Rick and Morty to get the picture. It's pretty much the same as Fallout 4, just in Appalachia. Same goes for the TV show, which I have actually seen. So yeah, that's it. What do you think? Are old Fallout fans just crybabies who can't let go, or has the newer art style regressed? Leave your thoughts below, and thank you for making it all the way to the end. Peace.